I stood in my son's bedroom, staring at the empty velvet box on his dresser. My heart pounded against my ribs as I gently lifted the lid, hoping somehow the watch would magically reappear. But there was nothing but the indentation in the cushion where my father's vintage Rolex had rested just yesterday. "Mom, are you sure you didn't move it?" Ethan's voice cracked behind me. At 16, he was already taller than me, but the worry in his eyes made him look like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "I wouldn't touch it without asking you, honey. You know that." I closed the box with trembling fingers. That watch was more than just a timepiece. It was the last gift my father had given to Ethan before cancer took him last year. Dad had saved for years to buy it in his 20s, wore it every day of his adult life, and had placed it in Ethan's hands himself from his hospital bed. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Amber. "Don't forget. Baby shower at 2. Can't wait to see you." The cheerful message made my stomach knot. I had to find that watch before heading to her house. As I searched every corner of Ethan's room, a terrible thought began to form in my mind. 3 days ago, my mother and Amber had stopped by unannounced while Ethan and I were at his soccer practice. They had used the spare key I'd given Mom for emergencies. "Just wanted to drop off some food," Mom had explained when we returned to find them in our kitchen. But Amber had emerged from the hallway that led to the bedrooms, claiming she'd been using the bathroom. I dismissed the thought immediately. My own sister wouldn't steal from her nephew. It was impossible. Unthinkable. But as I searched the house one final time before leaving for the baby shower, the empty velvet box seemed to mock me from Ethan's dresser. The drive to Amber's suburban home felt endless. Next to me, Ethan stared out the window, his fingers absently tracing where the watch should have been on his wrist. I reached over and squeezed his hand. "We'll find it, honey. I promise. It's the only thing I have from Grandpa," he whispered, and my heart broke all over again. Amber and I had always had a complicated relationship. As the younger sister, she'd grown up in my shadow, or at least that's how she saw it. While I worked hard through college and built my career as a physical therapist, Amber drifted from job to job, relationship to relationship. When she finally married Mark, a successful investment banker, 3 years ago, Mom acted like Amber had won the lottery. "Your sister finally has everything figured out," Mom would say, conveniently forgetting the times I'd loaned Amber money or let her crash at my place between apartments. And now, with a baby on the way, Amber had secured her position as the golden child in our mother's eyes. I pulled into the driveway of Amber's 2-story colonial, its manicured lawn dotted with pink balloons and a "Welcome Baby Girl" sign. The perfect home for the perfect daughter's perfect family. "I don't want to go in," Ethan said, his voice small. "I know, but we have to. Family obligations." The words tasted bitter. "Just an hour or two, then we can leave." Inside, the house was transformed into a pink wonderland. Amber greeted us with a hug, her baby bump prominent beneath a flowing floral dress. "You made it." "Everyone's in the living room." My eyes scanned her wrists automatically. "Nothing." Mom rushed over, enveloping Ethan in a hug he barely returned. "There's my handsome grandson." "Ethan, honey, there's cake in the dining room." As Ethan reluctantly headed for the food, Mom pulled me aside. "What's wrong with him? He seems off." I hesitated. Should I mention the watch? Ask if she'd seen anything when they visited? But the accusatory nature of the questions made me pause. "He's a teenager, Mom. Moody is their default setting." But as I mingled with guests, accepting congratulations for my soon-to-be aunt status, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The pile of expensive gifts growing on the table only intensified my unease. 2 hours into the shower, I was ready to leave. I'd smiled through innumerable baby games, eaten pink frosted cupcakes, and listened to Amber tell the story of how she'd manifested this pregnancy through vision boards and positive thinking, conveniently omitting the fertility treatments I'd helped her research and partially paid for. I was heading to find Ethan when my mother clinked her glass. Everyone, it's time for Amber to open her special gifts. The guests gathered around as Amber settled into a decorated chair. Mark stood behind her, phone ready to record. My mother sat at Amber's side, practically vibrating with excitement. "This first one is from me and Dad," Mom announced, handing Amber a small, gift-wrapped box. Amber tore through the wrapping paper and opened the velvet box inside. Her practiced gasp of delight froze me in place. Because there, nestled against black velvet, was my father's Rolex. "Oh my God, Mom. It's gorgeous." Amber lifted the watch, its gold band catching the light. "This must have cost a fortune." "Well," Mom beamed, "we wanted something special for Mark Jr. A family heirloom for when he's born." Time seemed to stop. Mark Jr.? They had already decided to name the baby a girl according to all the pink decorations after Amber's husband? And they were giving my son's watch to a baby that wasn't even born yet? I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Across the room, Ethan's eyes met mine, wide with shock and betrayal. Actually, I heard myself say, my voice strangely calm, "That watch already belongs to a member of this family." The room fell silent. Amber's smile faltered. "What are you talking about, Sarah? That watch belonged to Dad. He gave it to Ethan before he died. It was in Ethan's room until 3 days ago when you and Mom visited our house." Mom's face flushed. "Don't be ridiculous. Your father and I bought this last month." "Really? Then explain why it has the same scratch on the face that Dad got when he fell on our driveway 10 years ago. Or why the band has been sized exactly to fit Ethan's wrist." The silence in the room was deafening. "I think you should leave." Amber's voice had turned to ice, her hand protectively covering her belly as if I'd threatened her child instead of calling out her theft. "Not without Grandpa's watch." Ethan stepped forward, his hands trembling but his voice steady. Mark moved between us. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Amber and Linda told me they purchased this watch." "They're lying," I said, the dam inside me finally breaking. "That watch was given to Ethan while my father was dying. It was the last gift he gave anyone in this family." Mom stood up, her face contorted with anger. "How dare you ruin your sister's special day with these accusations? Your father would be ashamed of you." That was the final straw. Years of being the responsible one, the one who never complained, who always put family first, it all came crashing down around me. "No, Mom. Dad would be ashamed of you." I was shouting now, not caring about the shocked faces of the guests. "You stole from your own grandson to give a precious family heirloom to your favorite daughter's unborn child. What kind of grandmother does that?" Amber burst into tears, her perfectly applied makeup streaming down her face. "You're just jealous because Mom loves me more. You've always been jealous of me." "Jealous?" I laughed incredulously. "I paid your rent for 6 months when you got fired from the bank. I helped you study for your real estate exam. I've been bailing you out your entire adult life while you played the victim." "That's enough," Mom shouted. "Sarah, I'm warning you." "No, I've had enough." I turned to the silent, uncomfortable crowd. "I'm sorry you all had to witness this, but my son's property was stolen, and I won't pretend otherwise." I walked over to Amber and held out my hand. "The watch. Now." For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Then Mark gently took the Rolex from her hand and placed it in mine. "If what you're saying is true, then this belongs to Ethan." I closed my fingers around the cool metal, feeling my father's presence in its weight. "Thank you." As Ethan and I walked toward the door, Mom called after us. "If you walk out now, don't expect to be welcome back." I turned, meeting her gaze steadily. "That's fine. We're done being your second choice." The drive home was silent, the watch safely back on Ethan's wrist. As we pulled into our driveway, the memories I'd tried so hard to suppress came flooding back. Dad had always been fair. That was what made this betrayal by Mom and Amber so painful. He loved both his daughters equally, showing no favoritism despite Amber's attempts to manipulate him. When I was accepted to physical therapy school, he'd taken on extra shifts at the factory to help with tuition. When Amber dropped out of community college, he'd supported her while she found herself. "Mom?" Ethan's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Are you okay?" I realized I'd been sitting in the parked car, tears streaming down my face, just remembering Grandpa. Inside our modest home, the home I'd purchased alone after my divorce 6 years ago, I made us hot chocolate, a comfort ritual Dad had started when I was a little girl. "I keep thinking about something Grandpa told me," Ethan said, staring into his mug. "When he gave me the watch, he said, 'Time shows us who people really are.'" I smiled sadly. That sounds like him. Why would Grandma do this? She knows how much this watch means to me. The honest answer was too painful to share, but Ethan deserved the truth. Because to Mom, Amber has always come first. When we were growing up, Amber was the pretty one, the social one. I was the responsible one who never caused trouble. I told him about the piano lessons Mom had canceled to pay for Amber's cheerleading camp, about the college fund that mysteriously disappeared into renovations for Amber's first apartment, about the countless times I'd been told to be the bigger person when Amber had taken something of mine. Dad was different, I said. He made sure I knew I mattered too. That's why he saved up to help with my tuition, why he came to every soccer game of yours, even when he was working double shifts. Is that why he gave me the watch instead of leaving it for Aunt Amber's baby? The innocent question broke something open inside me. Yes, honey. He wanted you to have something that mattered to him because you mattered to him. Not because you were the favorite, but because you were loved. That night, as Ethan slept with the watch safely beside his bed, I sat on my porch and finally allowed myself to grieve not just for my father, but for the family I thought we had been. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected call. Alice, my father's older sister whom we rarely saw, was in town and wanted to meet for coffee. Curious and still raw from yesterday's confrontation, I agreed. Alice had always been something of a family outlier, unmarried, childless by choice, and fiercely independent. She'd traveled the world as a photojournalist and only settled back in the States after retirement. Dad had adored his big sister, but Mom had always dismissed her as too opinionated. At the coffee shop, Alice greeted me with a warm hug. At 72, she remained striking, with Dad's same kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. "I heard about what happened," she said after we'd ordered. "Linda called me, though I suspect her version differs significantly from reality." I sighed. "She told you I ruined Amber's baby shower with false accusations, I imagine." Alice's laugh was sharp. "Something like that. But I've known Linda for 45 years, Sarah. I know how she operates." As we talked, Alice shared insights about my mother that I'd never considered, how Linda's own mother had favored her sister, creating a cycle of insecurity and favoritism that she'd unconsciously repeated with Amber and me. "Your father tried to counterbalance it," Alice explained. "Frank saw what was happening and did his best to make sure you knew you were valued. That watch, he told me he was giving it to Ethan. He wanted to break the cycle. I always thought it was just me, that maybe I wasn't lovable enough, or I'd done something wrong." Alice reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "The problem was never you, Sarah. Some people can only see worth when it's wrapped in a package they understand. Your independence, your resilience, Linda sees those as threats, not strengths." As our coffee cups emptied and refilled, Alice shared stories of my father I'd never heard, of his pride in my accomplishments, of his concerns about Amber's dependence on others. "What do I do now?" I asked finally. Mom's ultimatum was pretty clear. "You live your life on your terms," Alice said simply. "You protect your son. You remember that family isn't just blood, it's who shows up for you consistently. And sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is step back from those who can't see your worth." Her words settled into me, Not as a revelation, but as confirmation of something I'd always known but been afraid to acknowledge. "Would you like to have dinner with Ethan and me tonight?" I asked impulsively. He'd love to hear more stories about his grandpa. Alice's smile was bright. "I thought you'd never ask." 2 weeks passed with no contact from Mom or Amber. I'd thrown myself into work and focused on helping Ethan process what had happened. Alice had become a regular visitor, filling our home with laughter and stories that kept Dad's memory alive. Then came the text from Mark, Amber's husband. "Can we meet? There's something you should know." We arranged to meet at a park halfway between our homes. When Mark arrived, he looked tired, the polished investment banker facade slipping to reveal genuine distress. "First, I want to apologize," he began as we sat on a bench overlooking the duck pond. "I had no idea about the watch. Amber told me her parents had purchased it as a gift for our baby." "I figured as much," I said, watching a family feed the ducks nearby. "You're not the type to steal from a kid." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "There's more. After you left, things fell apart. Your mother was furious, but some of the guests had obviously believed you. When everyone was gone, I confronted Amber about the watch." He paused, his expression troubled. "She admitted taking it. Said she deserved it more than Ethan because her baby would appreciate it properly. When I pushed further, He trailed off. "She what, Mark?" "She admitted this wasn't the first time. The pearl earrings that were supposed to be your college graduation gift from your dad? The vintage baseball cards your son was supposed to inherit? She's been taking things intended for you and Ethan for years, with your mother's knowledge and approval." The revelation should have shocked me, but instead, a strange calm settled over me. Pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was solving clicked into place: the missing jewelry I'd assumed I'd lost during moves, family heirlooms that had mysteriously disappeared. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. Mark looked directly at me. "Because it's wrong. Because Amber is having my child, and I don't want our daughter raised to think this behavior is acceptable. And because—" He hesitated. "Your father was kind to me. He welcomed me into the family when your mother and Amber were still testing me to see if I was successful enough. He deserved better than having his wishes disregarded." As Mark left, he handed me a small box. "These were in our safe. They belong to you." Inside were my grandmother's pearls, the graduation gift I'd been told had been lost in the mail. On the drive home, a strange mixture of vindication and grief washed over me. I'd been right all along, but the truth offered no real satisfaction, only confirmation that the family dynamics I'd experienced weren't just in my head. The pearls sat on my dresser for days as I processed Mark's revelations. I'd called Alice immediately after our meeting, and her calm response, "I'm not surprised, but I am sorry," had helped anchor me. What surprised me most was not the betrayal, but my own reaction to it. Instead of the crushing grief I'd expected, I felt something like relief, the relief of finally having external validation for what I'd sensed but couldn't prove for years. One evening, as Ethan and I made dinner together, his specialty lasagna that Dad had taught him to make, my son asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, are you sad that we don't see Grandma and Aunt Amber anymore?" I considered my answer carefully as I chopped tomatoes. "I'm sad about what could have been. I wish things were different. But I'm not sad about stepping away from people who didn't value us." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, layering pasta in the baking dish. "I've been thinking a lot about what Great Aunt Alice said about chosen family. In the weeks since the baby shower, we'd created new traditions with Alice: Sunday dinners, movie nights, weekend hikes. My colleagues had stepped up too. Single mom Jasmine had started a carpool system for our boys' soccer practices, and my mentor Dr. Reyes had become something of a grandfather figure to Ethan. "I think Grandpa would be proud of us," Ethan continued, "for standing up for ourselves, but also for finding new people who care about us for real." I hugged him, tomatoes-stained fingers and all. "When did you get so wise?" Later that night, I opened my jewelry box and placed my grandmother's pearls around my neck. Standing before the mirror, I saw not just my reflection, but echoes of my father's strength, Alice's independence, and now my own emerging resilience. The next morning, I made a decision. I called my lawyer and updated my will, ensuring that all family heirlooms and meaningful possessions were clearly designated for Ethan. Then I did something I'd been contemplating for years. I applied for the physical therapy director position at a prestigious sports medicine clinic in Denver, a role that would advance my career significantly. When the offer came 2 weeks later, Ethan and I sat down to discuss what a move would mean. To my surprise, he was enthusiastic. It's like a fresh start, right? And Great Aunt Alice already said she'd visit us. As we began planning our new life, I realized we weren't running away from our past, we were running toward a future we were actively choosing, one where we were valued for exactly who we were. The news of our impending move traveled quickly through family channels. 3 days after accepting the position in Denver, I received a barrage of texts from my mother, oscillating between guilt trips and demands that I reconsider, tearing Ethan away from his family. I didn't respond, but the following evening, as Ethan and I boxed up books in our living room, the doorbell rang. Mom stood on the porch, her expression a careful mask of concern. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "This has gone on long enough, Sarah. Your sister is due in a month, and this family drama needs to be resolved before the baby comes." "Hello to you too, Mom," I said, gesturing for Ethan to continue packing. "You can make this quick. We have a lot to do." Mom glanced at the boxes with dismay. "So it's true? You're really moving across the country just to spite me and your sister." The accusation was so predictable that I almost laughed. "This may shock you, but my career decisions aren't actually about you or Amber. I was offered an incredible opportunity, and I took it. What about Ethan? Have you considered what's best for him?" At this, Ethan looked up from his packing. "I'm right here, Grandma. Mom asked what I wanted, and I want to go to Denver. They have an amazing soccer program at the new school, and I'm actually excited about it." Mom blinked, seemingly thrown by the idea that her grandson had agency in this decision. "Well, I'm sure you think that now, but you'll miss your family. Your aunt's baby or cousin deserves to know you. The same aunt who stole my watch and other things meant for me and Mom?" Ethan's voice was steady. "I'm good with FaceTime relationships for people who don't respect my property." The sharpness of his response clearly shocked my mother. She turned to me. "What have you been telling him?" "Poisoning him against his family." Stop. For the first time in my life, I cut my mother off mid-sentence. "I've told Ethan the truth. Something you've never had the courage to do. Mark told me everything about the pearls, about the baseball cards, about all the things you and Amber have redirected from their intended recipients over the years." Mom's face paled. "Mark had no right. He had every right to be honest, which is more than I can say for you." I took a deep breath, centering myself. "Mom, I don't hate you or Amber. I've spent years trying to understand why you've treated me the way you have. But understanding doesn't mean I have to accept it anymore. So that's it? You're throwing away 38 years of family because of some misunderstandings about who was supposed to get what." "No, I'm prioritizing my son and myself after 38 years of being treated as an afterthought. There's a difference." I moved toward the door. "Ethan and I will be in Denver by the end of the month. You're welcome to call or visit, but only if you can respect our boundaries." As Mom left, her parting words were predictable. "Your father would be so disappointed in you." But this time, the barb didn't land. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, that my father would have been proud of me for finally standing in my own power. The Denver clinic exceeded my expectations. 6 months into our new life, I'd been recognized for implementing an innovative rehabilitation program for young athletes, and Ethan had been selected for an elite soccer training camp over the summer. Our apartment overlooked the mountains, and we'd developed a Saturday morning ritual of hiking before the day got too hot. On this particular morning, as we reached a spectacular viewpoint, Ethan checked the time on his grandfather's watch. "Mom, did I ever tell you what Grandpa said when he gave me this watch?" he asked, the sun highlighting his features that looked so much like my father's. "Something about time showing who people really are?" Ethan nodded. But there was more. He said, "This watch has kept perfect time for 30 years because I never let anyone mess with its mechanism. Remember that about yourself too, kid. Don't let anyone tamper with who you are." The simple wisdom of my father's words brought tears to my eyes. All along, he'd been trying to protect not just Ethan, but me as well, from the family dynamics he understood all too well. That evening, as we hosted Alice, who had made good on her promise to visit regularly, and our new friends from the clinic and Ethan's school for a barbecue, my phone pinged with a text from Mark. "Thought you'd want to know. Baby girl born yesterday. Named her Charlotte Sarah. Amber's idea. Maybe an olive branch?" I showed the text to Alice, who raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's unexpected. Do you think it's genuine?" I asked, watching Ethan laugh with his new friends across the patio. "Does it matter?" Alice replied, "You've built something beautiful here, Sarah. Whatever Amber's intentions, your response can be on your terms now." I considered this as I typed a simple reply, "Congratulations. May she grow up knowing her own worth." Later, as our guests departed and Ethan headed to bed, I sat on our balcony watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and pink. My father's voice seemed to whisper on the evening breeze, "You did it, kiddo. You found your time and place." I thought about the heirloom box I'd started for Ethan, containing not just physical items, but letters, stories, and wisdom from his grandfather, from Alice, and now from me. A legacy not of things taken, but of values freely given. Tomorrow, I would ship a small package to Charlotte Sarah, a silver baby bracelet that had once been mine, with a note explaining its history and significance. Not as a peace offering, but as a reminder that legacy isn't just what we inherit, but what we choose to pass on. Time passes differently when you're living authentically. The minutes don't drag, the hours don't need to be filled with distractions. The days flow with purpose. As I watch my son check the time on his grandfather's watch before his championship soccer game, I understand what Dad tried to teach us both. Inheritance isn't about objects, it's about the values embedded in them. That watch represents reliability, integrity, continuity. The real gift wasn't the Rolex. It was the permission to honor our own worth, to recognize when something is rightfully ours, and to protect it with quiet, unwavering certainty. Some might call what I did at the baby shower a small act of rebellion. I call it the first honest moment in a lifetime of accommodation. The watch keeps perfect time on my son's wrist. And finally, so do I.